This is HOA clapback. The HOA made it personal, and I made it documented. I work as a city permit tech in Chicago, so I know what requires a permit and what does not. And I can tell you right now that nothing about this situation requires anything except common sense. But common sense is not something the Hillcrest Landing Association board has ever heard of. And on this particular Tuesday morning, I am standing in the guest lot, watching a tow truck back up to my brother's car, while a woman in a black blazer and rubber gloves tells me I signed away my rights the day I clubbed. Ozed on my townhouse. Her name is Donna Smith. Everyone calls her Linda behind her back because she insists on going by her middle name, and she is the rules interpretation chair, which apparently means she gets to rewrite reality whenever it suits her. Right now, she is snapping those rubber gloves like she is about to perform surgery, and she has a portable thermal printer in her other hand, holding it up like it settles everything. Linda is talking. You signed the covenants. Now you live the covenants. That is her favorite line, and she has said it to me twice already this month. My brother parked in an unmarked spot for 10 minutes while he helped me move a bookshelf, and apparently that is enough for her to call in a predatory tow vendor who showed up in under 20 minutes. I am watching the driver hook the chain to the frame, and I am keeping my voice steady even though my hands are shaking. I tell Linda the spot is not marked. There is no sign, no paint, no decal requirement posted anywhere. She pulls a laminated page out of her blazer pocket and waves it at me. She says the parking addendum was approved last fall and every homeowner received an email. I tell her I never got an email, and she says that is my problem, not hers. The driver is cranking the winch now, and the rear wheels are starting to lift. I pull out my phone and I start recording. Linda sees the camera and her face goes red. She steps closer and she points at my phone and tells me recording is harassment, and she can fine me for that too. I keep the camera on her and I ask her to repeat what she just said about fining me daily. She does not hesitate. She says, I can fine you daily until you give up and you cry. I let the recording run for another 10 seconds, and then I lower the phone and I thank her. The tow driver looks uncomfortable now. He asks Linda if she has the signed authorization from the board, and she hands him a printed form that she just ran off the thermal printer. He looks at it, shrugs, and goes back to the winch. I walk up to him and I show him my phone screen with the expired authorization date I pulled from the county property portal last night. The form Linda gave him is dated today, but the board vote that supposedly authorized this vendor contract happened 9 months ago, and the contract lapsed in June. It is October now. The driver stops cranking. He looks at Linda. He asks her if the contract is current, and she tells him it is none of his business and he needs to finish the job. He shakes his head and he says he is not towing a car on an expired authorization because he has been sued before and he is not doing it again. He lowers the winch, unhooks the chain, and he drives off. Linda stands there with her thermal printer and her laminated page, and she is shaking with rage. She turns to me and she says this is not over. She says she is going to file a formal violation, and I am going to pay a $500 fine plus administrative costs. And if I do not pay within 14 days, she is going to put a lien on my property. I ask her what violation, and she says unauthorized guest parking without a valid decal. I ask her where the decal requirement is posted, and she says it is in the parking addendum that was emailed to everyone. I tell her I want a copy of that email, and she says I can request it through the records portal. I tell her I tried that last week, and the portal is down, and she says that is not her fault. I tell her it is her fault because she is the portal admin, and she says the hosting company is doing maintenance and it will be back up when it is back up. I ask her when that will be, and she says she does not know. I am standing there trying to keep my breathing even, because I have a custody and visitation routine with my ex, and the HOA has been targeting my schedule and my guests for 3 months now. Every time my brother visits, every time my ex drops off our son, every time a friend parks in the guest lot, Linda finds a reason to threaten a fine or call a tow truck. This is the 4th time she has tried to tow a vehicle, and it is the first time I have caught her with proof that she is making up the rules as she goes. But I did not play my hand yet, and she thought that meant I had none. I have been collecting board meeting minutes and quorum logs from the county clerk for 2 months, and I know exactly what vote she is talking about. The parking addendum was pushed through in a special session last November, with only 3 board members present, and the bylaws require 5 for a quorum. The vote was invalid, and Linda knows it because her name is on the minutes as the person who called the session. I do not tell her any of that. I just smile, and I say I will see her at the next board meeting. She snaps her gloves one more time, and she walks off toward the row of townhouses on the north end of the development. I watch her go, and then I get in my car and I drive to the county clerk to request certified copies of the minutes and the quorum log. I need them today because my attorney says if I want an emergency stop, I need 1 document today, and Linda is stalling on purpose. The county clerk is busy, but I get the documents by noon. I pay $15 for the certified copies, and I walk out with a manila envelope that contains everything I need to prove the parking addendum was never legally adopted. I drive back to Hillcrest Landing and I see Linda standing near my parking space with that portable folding sign stand she keeps trying to place there. The sign has no readable text, but I know what it says because she has tried this before. It is a guest parking restriction notice, and she thinks if she puts it close enough to my space, she can claim I was notified. I park in my assigned space and I get out. Linda is already walking toward me with her clipboard. She tells me she filed the violation, and I have 14 days to pay, or she is moving forward with the lien. I ask her if she filed it through the portal, and she says yes. I ask her how she filed it through the portal if the portal is down, and she says she has admin access and she can file violations even when the portal is offline for residents. That is when I realize she has been locking me out on purpose. The portal is not down for maintenance. She turned off resident access so I cannot request records or dispute violations, and she has been using the back end to file violations without giving me a chance to respond. I ask her if that is legal, and she says it is her job to enforce the covenants and she does not need my permission. I tell her I am going to file a formal records complaint with the board, and she laughs. She says the board does not care about complaints from residents who refuse to follow the rules. I tell her the rules are not valid if they were not adopted properly, and she stops laughing. She asks me what I mean, and I tell her I will explain it at the board meeting. She tells me the next meeting is not for 3 weeks, and I tell her I am aware of that. She does not like that answer. She steps closer and she says if I try to disrupt the meeting, she will have me removed. I ask her who is going to remove me, and she says the board president has the authority to call the police if a resident becomes disorderly. I tell her I am not planning to be disorderly. I am planning to present evidence, and she says evidence of what? I do not answer. I just walk past her and I go inside. My dash camera has been running this whole time, but the angle is blocked by glare from the windshield, and Linda is already claiming the clip I showed the tow driver is fake. She posted something in the neighborhood group chat about residents doctoring videos to avoid fines, and 3 people liked it before I even saw the message. I need better evidence, and I need a witness who can confirm what Linda said about fining me daily. I call my neighbor Mike, who lives 2 doors down, He works from home and he saw the whole thing this morning. He tells me he heard Linda say the line about fining me until I cry, and he is willing to write a statement if I need it. I ask him if he would be willing to show up at the board meeting and say it in person, and he says yes. He has his own issues with Linda because she tried to fine him for parking his work van in the guest lot overnight, and he had to fight it for 2 months before the board finally dropped it. Mike tells me he has been keeping a log of every time Linda shows up at his door with a clipboard, and he has dates and times for at least a dozen incidents. He says if I am going after the board, he wants in. I tell him I am not going after the board, I am going after the parking addendum, and he says that is the same thing because Linda is the one who pushed it through. He is right, but I do not want this to turn into a witch hunt. I just want the fines dropped and the policy reversed. That night, I get an email from the HOA attorney. The subject line says Records Request Response, and when I open it, I see a 1-paragraph message that says my request for board minutes and quorum logs has been received and will be processed within 30 business days, and there's a copying fee of 50 cents per page, plus a $25 administrative fee. I already have the documents from the county clerk, so I do not need the HOA copies, but I reply to the email, and I attach scans of the certified minutes and the quorum log. I write a short message. I tell the attorney that I have reviewed the minutes from the November special session, and I believe the parking addendum was adopted without a valid quorum, and I am requesting that the board rescind the policy and refund any fines collected under it. I ask for a response within 5 business days, and I hit send. 10 minutes later, I get an auto reply that says the attorney is out of the office until Monday. Linda does not wait. The next morning, I find a bright warning tag on my windshield. The tag has no readable text, but I know what it is because I have seen other people get them. It is a tow authorization notice, and it means the next time my car is in violation, the HOA is going to tow it without warning. I take a picture of the tag and I send it to Mike, and he tells me Linda put one on his van last month, and he had to threaten to sue before she removed it. I call the HOA management company, and I ask to speak to someone about the warning tag. The receptionist transfers me to a compliance officer who tells me the tag is standard procedure for repeat violations. I tell her I do not have any repeat violations, and she says the system shows 3 parking violations in the last 60 days. I ask her what violations, and she reads off a list: unauthorized guest parking, failure to display a valid decal, and parking in a fire lane. I tell her I have never parked in a fire lane, and she says the violation was recorded by the rules interpretation chair during a property inspection. I ask her when the inspection happened, and she says September 15th. I check my calendar and I see that I was at work that day, and my car was in my assigned space the entire time. I tell her that, and she says she will look into it and get back to me. She does not get back to me. Instead, I get a certified letter 2 days later. The letter is from Linda, and it says I have failed to pay the $500 fine for unauthorized guest parking, and the HOA is now adding a $200 late fee and a $150 administrative fee. The total is $850, and I have 7 days to pay or the HOA will proceed with a lien and a lawsuit for recovery of costs. I read the letter 3 times, and then I call my attorney. His name is Greg, and he has been helping me with the custody arrangement, but he also does property law. I tell him about the letter and the parking addendum and the invalid quorum, and he tells me I have a strong case, but I need to move fast because the HOA can file a lien in as little as 10 days if they follow the statutory notice requirements. Greg tells me to file a formal records complaint with the board and to send a copy to the HOA attorney, with a demand that they stop all collection activity until the validity of the parking addendum is resolved. He also tells me to document every interaction with Linda, because if this goes to court, we are going to need to show a pattern of harassment and retaliation. I tell him I have been documenting everything, and he says good, keep doing it. I draft the records complaint that night. I attach the certified minutes in the quorum log, and I include a timeline of every violation notice, every tow attempt, and every interaction with Linda. I send the complaint to the board president, the HOA attorney, and the management company, and I CC Mike so he has a copy. I also post a summary in the neighborhood group chat, and within an hour I have 6 responses from other residents who say they have had similar issues with Linda and the parking enforcement. One of the residents is a woman named Karen, which is ironic, but she is nothing like Linda. She tells me she got fined $300 for letting her daughter park in the guest lot overnight, and when she tried to dispute it, Linda told her the parking addendum does not allow overnight guest parking under any circumstances. Karen says she paid the fine because she did not want to deal with a lien, but now she wants her money back. Another resident, a guy named Tom, says he got fined for parking his motorcycle in a guest space, and Linda told him motorcycles do not qualify as guest vehicles. He says he fought it and won, but it took 4 months and the board never apologized. A third resident, a retired teacher named Diane, says Linda tried to tow her son's car while he was visiting for Thanksgiving, and she had to call the police to get the tow truck to leave. I read all the messages, and I realize this is bigger than just my case. Linda has been using the parking addendum as a weapon to harass residents she does not like, and the board has been letting her do it because they do not want to deal with the complaints. I screenshot the group chat and I send it to Greg, and he tells me this is exactly the kind of evidence we need to show that the HOA is operating in bad faith. If you are enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe because I have a lot more HOA chaos coming your way. The next day I get a response from the HOA attorney. The email is short, and the tone is completely different from the first auto reply. The attorney says he has reviewed the minutes and the quorum log I provided, and he agrees that the November special session did not meet the quorum requirement under the bylaws. He says the board is scheduling an emergency meeting to discuss the parking addendum, and all enforcement activity related to parking violations will be suspended pending the outcome of that meeting. I forward the email to Mike, Karen, Tom, and Diane, and the group chat explodes. People are asking what this means, whether they can get refunds, whether Linda is going to be held accountable. I tell them I do not know yet, but the attorney just admitted the parking policy is invalid, and that is a huge win. Mike says he is coming to the emergency meeting, and so is Karen. Tom says he is going to bring his receipt showing he paid a fine under an invalid policy. Linda does not take it well. The next morning she is waiting for me in the parking lot with her clipboard and that portable folding sign stand. She tells me the attorney made a mistake, and the parking addendum is still valid, and I still owe $850. I show her the email from the attorney on my phone, and she says the attorney does not speak for the board. I ask her who does speak for the board, and she says the board president does, and the board president has not said anything about suspending enforcement. I call the management company, and I ask to speak to the board president. The receptionist tells me the board president is not available, but she can take a message. I leave a message asking the board president to confirm that enforcement is suspended, and I ask for a call back within 24 hours. I do not get a call back. Instead, I get another email from Linda, and this one says the board has reviewed my complaint and determined that it is without merit, and the HOA is proceeding with the lien. Greg tells me that is retaliation, and it is illegal under Illinois law. He says we need to file an emergency motion to stop the lien, and we need to do it now because the HOA can file the lien as early as tomorrow. He drafts the motion, and he files it with the county court that afternoon, and we get a hearing date for the following week. Greg also sends a demand letter to the board president and the HOA attorney, and he warns them that if they file the lien before the hearing, he is going to seek sanctions and attorney fees. That night I get a call from a local news tip line staffer named Rachel. She tells me she saw my post in the neighborhood group chat, and she thinks it could be a story. She asks me if I would be willing to talk on camera, and I tell her I would, but I want to wait until after the hearing because I do not want to give the HOA any ammunition. She says that is smart, and she gives me her number and tells me to call her when I am ready. Rachel tells me that if I want the story to have impact, I need to focus on the documents. She says the minutes and the quorum log are gold because they prove the board knew the vote was invalid, and they did it anyway. She also tells me to get copies of any emails or text messages where Linda or the board members talk about enforcement, because that will show intent. I tell her I have been saving everything, and she says good, because that is what is going to make the difference. The emergency board meeting happens 3 days later. It is held in the clubhouse at 7 p.m., and when I walk in, the room is packed. Mike is there, and so are Karen, Tom, Diane, and at least a dozen other residents. Linda is sitting at the front table with the board president and 2 other board members, and she is staring at me with a look that could melt steel. The board president calls the meeting to order and says they are here to discuss the parking addendum and the concerns that have been raised about the quorum. The board president reads a prepared statement. He says the board has reviewed the minutes from the November special session and confirmed that only 3 members were present, which is below the required quorum of 5. He says the parking addendum was therefore not properly adopted, and the board is rescinding the policy effective immediately. He also says that any fines collected under the parking addendum will be refunded, and any pending violations will be dismissed. Linda interrupts. She says the board cannot rescind the policy without a vote, and the board has not voted on anything tonight. The board president tells her the vote is happening right now, and he calls for a motion to rescind the parking addendum. One of the other board members makes the motion, and the second board member seconds it. The board president calls for a vote, and all 3 vote yes. Linda does not get to vote because she is not a board member. She is just the rules interpretation chair, and the board president tells her that. Linda stands up and she says this is a coup, and she is not going to stand for it. She says the parking addendum was her idea, and she spent months drafting it, and the board has no right to throw it out just because a few residents complained. The board president tells her to sit down, and she refuses. She says she is going to file a complaint with the state attorney general, and the board is going to regret this. Mike stands up and he says he has something to add. He pulls out his phone, and he plays a recording of Linda saying she can find me daily until I give up and I cry. The room goes silent. The board president asks Mike where he got that recording, and Mike says he was standing outside my car when Linda said it, and he recorded it because he knew Linda would deny it later. The board president looks at Linda and asks her if that is true, and Linda says the recording is fake and Mike is lying. Karen stands up and she says she has a recording too. She plays a voice message Linda left her last month, and in the message Linda says if Karen does not pay the fine within 7 days, Linda is going to make sure Karen regrets ever buying a home in Hillcrest Landing. The board president looks stunned. He asks Linda if she left that message, and Linda says she does not remember, but even if she did, it was justified because Karen was in violation. Tom stands up, and he says he has emails. He pulls out printed copies of emails where Linda threatens to put a lien on his property if he does not pay a fine for parking his motorcycle in a guest space. And in one of the emails, Linda says motorcycles are not real vehicles, and they do not belong in the development. The board president looks at the emails, and then he looks at Linda, and he says they need to talk after the meeting. But Linda is not done. She stands up again and she says the board has no authority to strip her of her role as rules interpretation chair, and she is going to continue enforcing the covenants whether the board likes it or not. The board president tells her that is not how it works, and if she does not sit down and stop disrupting the meeting, he is going to ask her to leave. Linda says she is not leaving, and she is not sitting down, and the board can try to remove her, but she will sue them for wrongful termination. That is when I stand up. I pull the manila envelope out of my jacket, and I walk to the front of the room. I hand the envelope to the board president, and I tell him it contains certified copies of the meeting minutes and the quorum log, and it also contains a formal records complaint documenting every violation notice, every tow attempt, and every interaction I have had with Linda over the past 3 months. I tell him I filed a formal records complaint and attach the proof so the board cannot hide it, and I have sent copies to the HOA attorney and the management company. The board president opens the envelope and he starts reading. His face goes pale. He looks at Linda and he asks her if she was aware that the November vote did not meet quorum, and Linda says of course she was aware. She was the one who called the session. The board president asks her why she called a session without quorum, and Linda says she needed to get the parking addendum passed before the end of the year, and she did not have time to wait for a full board meeting. The room erupts. People are shouting, asking why Linda is still in charge of anything, asking why the board let her get away with this for so long. The board president bangs a gavel and he tells everyone to calm down. He says the board is going to launch an internal review of Linda's actions, and in the meantime, Linda is suspended from all enforcement duties. Linda says he cannot suspend her, and the board president says he just did. Linda grabs her clipboard and her portable folding sign stand, and she storms out of the clubhouse. The board president calls a 10-minute recess, and people start gathering in small groups to talk about what just happened. Mike comes over and he tells me that was incredible, and he cannot believe Linda admitted she knew the vote was invalid. I tell him I cannot believe it either, but I am glad we have it on record now. When the meeting resumes, the board president says the board is going to vote on whether to remove Linda as rules interpretation chair. He calls for a motion, and one of the board members makes the motion. The second board member seconds it, and the vote is unanimous. Linda is no longer the rules interpretation chair, and the board president says the board is also going to review her access to the HOA portal and determine whether she needs to be removed as admin. I asked the board president if the refunds for fines collected under the parking addendum are going to be processed automatically, or if residents need to file a claim. He says the management company is going to send out a notice to everyone who paid a fine under the parking addendum, and they will receive a check within 30 days. I ask him if that includes late fees and administrative fees, and he says yes, it includes everything. Karen asks if the board is going to take any action against Linda for leaving threatening voice messages and emails, and the board president says the board is going to consult with the HOA attorney about potential legal options. He also says that if any resident feels they have been harassed or retaliated against by Linda, they should file a formal complaint with the board and the management company, and the board will investigate. The meeting ends at 9 p.m., and people are still talking in the parking lot when I leave. Mike tells me he is going to file a complaint about Linda trying to fine him for parking his work van, and Karen says she is going to file a complaint about the threatening voice message. Tom says he is going to file a complaint about the motorcycle email. I tell them I am going to file a complaint about the tow attempt and the warning tag and the certified letter demanding $850. The next morning, I get an email from the HOA attorney. The email says the board has directed him to withdraw from representing the HOA in any matter related to the parking addendum or any enforcement actions taken under it. He says the board is concerned about potential liability and they want to resolve all outstanding issues as quickly as possible. He also says that if I am still interested in pursuing a claim for harassment or retaliation, I should contact the management company to discuss a settlement. I forward the email to Greg, and he tells me this is huge. He says the attorney withdrawing mid-crisis is a clear sign that the board knows they are on the hook for what Linda did, and they are trying to limit their exposure. He says we should absolutely pursue a settlement, but we should also make sure the settlement includes a provision that Linda is permanently barred from any enforcement rule in the HOA, and that the board agrees to implement oversight policies to prevent this from happening again. I call the management company, and I ask to speak to someone about a settlement. I get transferred to a senior compliance officer who tells me the board is prepared to offer a full refund of any fines I paid, plus reimbursement for my attorney fees, plus a written apology from the board. I tell her that is a good start, but I also want Linda removed as portal admin, and I want the board to adopt a new policy that requires all enforcement actions to be reviewed by the management company before they are issued. The compliance officer says she will take my request to the board and get back to me. 2 days later, I get a call from the board president. He tells me the board has agreed to all my terms, and they are going to send me a settlement agreement for review. He also tells me that Linda has been stripped of access to the portal admin tools, and the board is in the process of hiring a third-party compliance company to handle all enforcement going forward. I ask him why it took so long for the board to realize Linda was out of control, and he says the board trusted her because she had been on the Rules Interpretation Committee for 5 years, and she always seemed to know what she was doing. He says the board did not realize she was pushing through policies without proper votes until I brought the quorum issue to their attention, and once they started digging, they found a lot of other problems. He apologizes for not catching it sooner, and he says the board is committed to making sure it does not happen again. The settlement agreement arrives a week later. It includes a full refund of the $850 Linda tried to collect, plus $2,000 in attorney fees, plus a written apology from the board that will be posted in the community newsletter. It also includes a provision that Linda is permanently barred from any enforcement role, and the board agrees to adopt a new oversight policy that requires all enforcement actions to be approved by the management company before they are issued. I sign the agreement and I send it back. The refund check arrives 10 days later, along with a letter from the board president thanking me for bringing the quorum issue to their attention. The letter says the board has also decided to conduct a full audit of all enforcement actions taken under Linda's tenure as Rules Interpretation Chair, and they are offering refunds to any resident who paid a fine that was not properly authorized. Karen, Tom, and Diane all get refund checks. Mike gets a letter saying his fine for parking his work van was dismissed, and he does not owe anything. The neighborhood group chat is full of people celebrating, and someone posts a screenshot of Linda's profile being removed from the HOA portal. People are commenting that they cannot believe it took this long for the board to act, but they are glad it finally happened. But the best part comes 2 weeks later. I am standing at the USPS mailbox cluster curb, checking my mail, when Linda pulls up in her car. She gets out with her clipboard, and she walks toward me like she is about to start another round of enforcement. I do not say anything. I just stand there and I wait. She gets within 10 feet of me, and she opens her mouth to say something, and that is when a sheriff deputy pulls up behind her. The deputy tells Linda she needs to step back. Linda looks at him, and she asks him why, and he tells her there is a restraining order in place that prohibits her from approaching me or any other resident who filed a harassment complaint. Linda says that is ridiculous, and the deputy tells her if she does not step back right now, he is going to arrest her for violating the order. Linda takes 2 steps back, but she keeps glaring at me. I pull out my phone and I start recording. Linda sees the camera and she loses it. She starts yelling that I am the reason the board turned against her, and I am the reason she lost her position, and I am going to regret this. The deputy steps between us and he tells Linda to get back in her car and leave, and if she does not leave right now, he is taking her to the station. Linda gets in her car and she drives off, and the deputy asks me if I am okay. I tell him I am fine, and I thank him for showing up. The deputy tells me he was called by the management company because they got an alert that Linda was in the area near a resident who had filed a harassment complaint. He says the board hired a monitoring service after the settlement, and if Linda comes within 100 feet of me or any other resident who filed a complaint, the service sends an alert to the deputy and the management company. I tell him that is good to know, and he tells me to call him if Linda shows up again. 2 months later, the board holds a special election to fill the vacant rules interpretation chair position. A neighbor petition that forces a vote during the meeting succeeds, and the board is required to accept nominations from residents. Tom nominates Mike, and someone seconds it. Linda tries to nominate herself, but the board president tells her she is not eligible because she is under a restraining order. Linda argues, but the board votes, and Mike wins by a landslide. Mike's first act as rules interpretation chair is to propose a new guest parking policy that actually makes sense. The policy allows guests to park in any unmarked space for up to 48 hours without a decal, and it requires the board to post clear signage at every guest lot entrance. The policy passes unanimously, and the board directs the management company to install the signs within 30 days. The HOA loses in small claims court and pays costs for 3 other residents who filed similar claims after I settled. The judge rules that the parking addendum was invalid and the fines collected under it were unjust enrichment, and the HOA is ordered to pay court costs and interest on the refunds. The board sends out another round of refund checks, and the community newsletter includes a full apology and a summary of the changes the board is making to prevent future abuses. Linda moves out of Hillcrest Landing 6 months later. I do not know where she goes, and I do not care. The neighborhood is quieter without her, and people are actually starting to use the guest lot without fear of getting towed. The portable folding sign stand she used to place near my parking space is gone, and the management company confirms that all enforcement actions are now reviewed before they are issued. I get a call from Rachel, the news tip line staffer, and she tells me the story ran on the local news website, and it got over 50,000 views in the first week. She says people are sharing it on social media and calling it a perfect example of HOA overreach, and she has gotten calls from other residents in other developments who say they are dealing with similar issues. She asks me if I would be willing to do a follow-up interview, and I tell her maybe later, but right now I just want to enjoy the peace and quiet. Greg sends me a final bill for his services, and the total is covered by the settlement reimbursement. He tells me he is glad we won, and he hopes I never have to deal with another HOA dispute again. I tell him I hope so too, but I am keeping his number just in case. He laughs and he tells me to stay out of trouble. Mike and I become friends. We grab coffee once a week and we talk about the neighborhood and the board and how much better things are now that Linda is gone. He tells me he is going to run for the board next year, and I tell him he has my vote. He says if he wins, the first thing he is going to do is make sure the board never hires another rules interpretation chair without a full background check and oversight policy. The neighborhood group chat is still active, but the tone is completely different now. People are posting about community events and asking for recommendations for contractors and celebrating good news instead of complaining about fines. Someone posts a photo of the new guest parking signs, and the comments are all positive. One person writes that they are glad the board finally listened, and another person writes that they are glad the community stood together. I drive past the spot where the tow truck tried to take my brother's car, and I see a neighbor pointing at the tow hook chain that is still lying on the ground from that day. The neighbor is talking to someone new who just moved in, and he is explaining the whole story. I slow down and I wave, and the neighbor waves back. I keep driving, and I think about how close I came to losing this fight, and how lucky I am that I had the documents and the witnesses and the attorney and the support of the community. A few weeks later, I get a check in the mail from the HOA. The check is for $500, and the memo line says refund parking violation. I never paid the $500 fine Linda tried to collect, so I am confused about why I am getting a refund. I call the management company and I ask them about it, and they tell me the board decided to issue a goodwill payment to every resident who was targeted by Linda, even if they did not pay a fine. The board wants to show that they are serious about making things right. I deposit the check, and I use the money to take my son to a Cubs game. We get seats behind home plate, and we eat hot dogs and drink soda, and we watch the Cubs beat the Cardinals in extra innings. My son asks me why I am in such a good mood, and I tell him it is because sometimes good things happen when you stand up for yourself. He asks me what I mean, and I tell him I will explain it when he is older. That night I get a text from Mike. He tells me Linda filed a lawsuit against the board and the management company, claiming wrongful termination and defamation. He says the board is not worried because they have all the evidence and the recordings and the settlement agreements, and their attorney says Linda does not have a case. I tell him to keep me posted, and he says he will. The lawsuit gets dismissed 3 months later. The judge rules that Linda was not an employee of the HOA. She was a volunteer committee chair, and the board had the authority to remove her at any time. The judge also rules that the board did not defame Linda because everything they said about her was true and supported by evidence. Linda is ordered to pay the board's attorney fees, and the judge warns her that if she files another frivolous lawsuit, she will face sanctions. I hear through the neighborhood group chat that Linda tried to join the board of her new HOA, but the board rejected her application after they did a background check and found out about the restraining order and the lawsuit. Someone posts a screenshot of a public record search showing Linda's name on a list of people banned from serving on HOA boards in Illinois, and people are commenting that karma finally caught up to her. I do not post anything in the group chat. I do not need to. The story speaks for itself, and people already know what happened. I just keep living my life, dropping off my son at his mom's house, going to work, parking in my assigned space, and not worrying about getting fined or towed or harassed. It is a good feeling, and I never take it for granted. 1 year later, I am standing in the parking lot when a new resident moves in. She is unloading boxes from a moving truck, and she asks me if the HOA is strict about parking rules. I tell her the HOA used to be a nightmare, but it is a lot better now. She asks me what changed, and I tell her the residents stood up and demanded accountability, and the board listened. She says that is good to know, and she asks me if I have any advice. I tell her to document everything, keep copies of all your paperwork, and do not be afraid to fight back if the HOA tries to overstep. She thanks me and she goes back to unloading boxes. I watch her for a minute, and then I walk back to my townhouse. I think about everything that happened with Linda, and the parking addendum, and the tow attempt, and the settlement. And I realized that the biggest lesson I learned is that HOAs only have as much power as residents let them have. If you know your rights and you are willing to stand up, you can win. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.